All right, we're back on. Okay, let us get started on Mem Bet. Right? A quick reminder, everybody, that as of Friday, I believe we will need volume 2 if you're using ArtScroll. Okay,
You order it from Amazon, it'll be here tomorrow.
I would hope that most of the people in the Shia already have it already.
I was just coming.
You're right, you're right,
Instantly without.
you're right.
You order from Eichler's, it won't be here for 12 weeks.
Yeah, okay. What?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but then they charge you for shipping.
Right? Okay. All right. So we're on Mem Bet Amud Aleph, the top of the Amud, first new Mishnah that again continues to tell us, as the previous series of Mishnayot did, okay, if there's a neder by one person towards another, the situation is, are there things that the person who is not to benefit still able to do for the other individual? Okay. Right, so what happens? Matnitin says, our Mishnah, the one subject to the vow, Hamudar, Hana'am Chavero, prior to the year of Lifnei Shvi'it, Eino Yored L'toch Sodehu, he cannot enter his field, Ve'eno Ochel Min Hanotot, he cannot eat any fruit from branches that hang beyond the field borders, Ubashvi'it, and if the vow was made in the year of Shvi'it, Eino Yored L'toch Sodehu, he cannot enter the field. Aval Ochel Hu Min Hanetiot or Hanotot, but he may eat from, right? He may eat from the hanging branches over the border, okay, with that fruit. Okay. Furthermore, says our Mishnah, Nadar Himenu Ma'achal Lifnei Shvi'it. Okay, if the vow was made, okay, regarding food, okay, before the Shvi'it year, Yored L'toch Sadehu, V'oino Ochel Min HaPeirot. He can go into the field, but he can't eat from any of the produce. Ubashvi'it, but were the vow to have been made the year of Shvi'it, Yored V'ochel. He may enter the field and eat of the produce. Remember the fact that Shvi'it, during that year, both the produce and the land is considered hefker, okay? And therefore that is part of the reason. We'll clarify it. Well, that's, look at ArtScroll. We're going to come back to that in a second, okay? Let's go now. We're going to see an interesting machloket here between two generations of Amoraim. Rav Shmuel, the Amrei Travaim. Rav and Shmuel, the two of them said, Nechasim elu alach, if somebody makes their vow that my property is forbidden, okay, that's their vow for
this property.
Right? Well, Nechasim elu, okay?
This property.
We're going to say, okay, I'll come back to it. You're right. Okay, we're saying the Nechasim elu as opposed to Nechasim shali or Nechasim or Nichsai. That's what I wanted to say. Okay, so it's this property as opposed to specifically saying my property. We're going to see. Okay, Lifnei Shvi'it, before the Shemitah year, right? Ein Yored L'toch Sodehu. He is not permitted to enter that person, the person who made the vow, their field. Ve'eno Ochel Min Hanotot. Okay, and they can't eat from the
hangovers.
The leftover, the things hanging over. Okay. All right, so what happens? Ve'im b'shvi'it nadar, and if they made the vow during the Shemitah year, right? Ein yored l'toch sadehu, he is not able to go into the field, right? Ava ochel min hanotot, but he is able to eat from the hanging produce and the branches on the border of the field, over the field, over the border of the field. Okay, now that's their view. Okay, yeah.
If I'm next to you and his branches are hanging over my property, and he's telling me I can't eat from his field, and yet his branches are hanging over my property, do I have a right to cut it down, or do I have a right to eat from it?
You do
Let's-
not have a right to eat from it.
Okay,
You
number
got it.
one, let's see if the Gemara addresses it. Number two, do you have a right to cut it down? No.
Yes.
Well, theoretically, you could cut it down, but you can't eat from it.
But it's still on my
Because
property.
still, if I made the vow that
The
this
roots are on his property.
that this property is forbidden to you, the result is you can't do it.
If
you
you
can't-
own the tree.
Okay, because the tree is in my property.
I didn't dig down to see where the roots are.
No, but I know where the roots are, and the roots are in my property, my land, and therefore I've said this land, this property is forbidden to you. So that means the tree and anything from the tree.
I'm not saying no, I agree with you.
Right.
But this tree, the branches are hanging over on my property.
I
That's what
understand.
no close means.
That's what this is.
I can't see the sun and all these things which are happening to me here. His tree is causing me this particular problem.
So take them to Din Torah.
So
They'll tell
the
you to
point
cut
is,
down.
theoretically, you could cut down the branch, okay? But you
still
can't eat from it.
Right.
But you can't eat from it.
I can't eat.
Right.
Correct. You do- If
Okay.
you were a squirrel, you could eat.
Unless he says, unless I'm a player, then I can.
No. Not even if he was no there that you can't have any benefit.
I'm having benefit from it.
Right. Okay, let's go on. V'Rabbi Yochanan v'Reish Lakish ta'amrei travaihu. And the two of them say as follows. Nichsei alayich. Notice the difference in language between nichasim elu and nichsai alayich. That's what I, okay, wanted to point out earlier.
These things.
This property,
All this stuff here. these
this
things.
property versus my property. Because we're going to see, is there a limit when I say it's my property?
Be the same.
Okay? If I say it's my property, maybe it's only my property when it's in my ownership. And if it's no longer in my ownership, as the Gemara is going to tell us, because I might at a point and I'm dead, or on the point that I've sold the land, it's no longer my
We
property,
had that,
and then it won't be
before.
forbidden.
we had it with the loaf of bread.
Not his property anymore.
Exactly. We'll get to that. We'll get to that. Hold on. Okay? V'Reish V'Rabbi Yochanan v'Reish Lakish ta'amrei travaihu, that the two of them say, nichsai alayach. If he says the neder that way, my property is forbidden. You can't benefit from it. Lifnei shvi'it, if he says it before the Shemitah year, ein yorei l'toch sodehu, he is not permitted to go into the land. Ve'ein ochel min hanotot, and he is not permitted to eat from the
Danglers.
hanging fruit over the border. Higia shvi'it, when the shvi'it year comes, okay, eino yorei l'toch sodehu, he still cannot go into the field. Aval ochelhu et hanotot, but he then may eat that produce hanging over the border. So the Gemara says, Lema bahakam iflageh. Shall we say this is what the argument is between Rav and Shmuel versus Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish? The Rav Shmuel savrei, that the two of them are of the opinion savrei Adam oser davar shebershuto, that when a person, I'm going to say, forbids something that is part of his domain, afilu l'ksheyetze rishuto, even when it's no longer in his domain, that prohibition is still maintained, still in existence. V'Rabbi Yochanan v'Reish Lakish, the two of them, Savre ein adam oser davar shebershuto l'ksheyetzei mirshuto. That a person cannot prohibit something that was in his domain once it's no longer in his domain, when it's outside his domain. Okay? V'tispara, and you think that's possible. Mi'ika lemanda amar ein adam oser davar shebershuto l'kshei rishuto. Do you really think it's possible that somebody might be of the opinion that when a person prohibits something while it is in his property or domain, when it's no longer in his, when it's outside or no longer in his domain or property, it's still going to be forbidden? Im kain, if that's the case, niflagei b'nechasin elu, then that's the case. They should argue when the person makes the language of this domain as opposed to my domain. Okay? V'kol shekain b'nechasai, and certainly if he makes the language of his vow when he says it, my domain. Okay? So what happens for two? And furthermore, Hatnan, isn't it taught elsewhere in the Mishnah? The Adam oser davar shebershuto, l'kshetzei mirshuto, that a person forbids something that's in his domain, even when it's beyond his domain. Tutnan, because we learned elsewhere in this Mishnah, Ha'omer libno, konem she'ata nehaneli, one who says to his son, I make a vow, like sacrifices, that you cannot benefit from me, mate, if that individual dies,
The father dies.
right,
One of
the father dies, your shenu, the son is still able to be an heir and inherit from it,
Because the father's dead and we hold it.
right?
doesn't
And
carry
it doesn't carry it. But were the father to have said, okay, in his neder, bechayav ubemoto, that you are not to benefit from me either while I'm alive or deceased. Okay, let's go over. Imate lo yershenu. If the father, when at the time the father dies, that son will not inherit.
Not irrelevant what the Torah says, let's say the Bechor that it gets. Torah says he's supposed to get Yerusha.
He may get his Yerusha. Look at how it's going. He may get the Yerusha, but he can't benefit from it.
Well, it says he doesn't inherit.
No.
I mean, that's a machlokes, whether he.
Okay, he may inherit, but he may not benefit from it.
What if he didn't?
What?
Didn't get anything, but
What can I say?
No, he could give it away to
All right.
someone and
He
they
could-
could give it back.
He can sell it. He can. Can't benefit from it.
And
He
we
can
had
do
that
something with it. Okay? All right. Right. That's what it means. If he said in my, whether I'm alive or dead, you can't benefit from it. That means he died, right? So that's the point. Lo yirashenu.
Wait a second, you want to give me the exact text?
I didn't write down.
No,
the-
no, I want it.
Okay. Imate
Tell my-
lo yirshenu. Okay, let's go on. So the Gemara raises the question, Shani hachem. Maybe it's different here. The ka'amarle. Why? Because maybe in that particular case, all right, b'chayav ubemoto. The father specifically said, okay, both while I'm alive and while I am deceased. Okay,
You say it's after.
What is that?
Nothing.
mikom makom kasha. The Gemara says, in any case, we have a problem. Okay, so our problem, guys, our problem basically is what is going to be the difference between saying this property and my property? Okay, that's the key issue. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to clarify. Maybe our machloket, okay, is not exactly between Rabbi Yochanan and Resh Lakish and Rav and Shmuel on that, on whether the individual making the neder can continue to forbid something beyond his domain or life, but maybe the machloket is in another aspect. And let's see what the Gemara says. Ella, rather, b'nechasim elu, when the person who made the neder says this property, kuli amalo plige, they don't disagree. Ki pligi, where do they disagree? B'nichsai, when the person said my property. Ravu Shmuel, the two of them hold savrei lo shana nechasim elu, lo shana nechasai, that there is no difference between whether the person says this property or my property.
What is this property? Where does it belong?
This property. You're in my apartment, and I go like this. This property is forbidden to you. Get out.
Okay. The
The context indicates it's my possessions,
okay.
but I
In other
didn't
words-
say my.
Okay.
Just the word.
In other words,
The word.
the wording is very
Wait,
explicit, and in it being explicit, we're trying to clarify. When he says this property, is he referring to it belonging to him as opposed to my property, which clearly defines it, as explicitly defines it as belonging to him?
Yeah, and again,
My is more explicit.
The question is because the
Actually,
my then
yeah.
when it's sold, it's no longer.
Well, that's another issue.
That's
but
that's
we had,
another
it's interesting because the Gemara, we had this exact case once before with the loaf of bread.
I know,
And the Gemara does not raise that.
right, so this is more significant.
Is this similar to when somebody makes wants to give a korban and he says, I'm giving this behemoth as opposed to a behemoth?
Could be.
One's,
Okay, let's go. Ted,
there's no.
one guy at a time, please.
This one.
Shh, guys, please.
This property is more specific. Yes.
No. The Gemara is saying, it would seem, the argument the Gemara is asking now is that for Rav and Shmuel, they seem to imply, their opinion seems to be that whether the person says this property or my property, they're really saying the same thing, okay? And therefore, we're going to see, their view was that that is forbidden to that person, okay? Now, we're going to, the question, the Gemara is going to go on now and clarify what happens to the other part, okay? Why? B'nichsei Rav Shmuel Savrei lo shana nichasim elu, lo shana nichsai. That Rav and Shmuel hold there is no difference between the person making the vow saying this property and the person making the vow saying my property, okay? All right, hold on, Sid, hold on, okay? Adam Oser, the person is prohibited. Now your question.
You're telling me my property, when he made the vow, a week later, he bought another piece of property. Is it still classified as my property?
Yes,
yes.
Or he used
Yeah,
the
it
word
would-
this
would-
property?
that's another question. That's another question. Let's see if the Gemara addresses. That's a whole different question. Let's just deal with this one now,
It would apply only to the property he possessed.
okay? Rabbi Yochanan v'Reish Lakish Savrei, whereas Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, their opinion is nichsai. When the person says my property, Adam Oser, the person against whom the vow is made is prohibited. Okay, right? All right. Nichsai ein Adam Oser. All right. So what happens? Right? So when he says Nechasim Adam Oser, Nesai Ein Adam Oser.
If it's transferred.
If it's right. In other words, at that point, if he said it my property, okay, and then it no longer continues to be his property forever, whatever reason, either by sale or by death, then the person against whom the vow was made is not prohibited. That's the
Because the ownership changed.
right.
But if he said this property,
It doesn't
it
change.
wouldn't change because the property hasn't
Right.
changed.
Umi ika laman da amar lo shna nechasim elu v'lo shana nechsan. Is there really someone who says, asks the Gemara, that they're saying that there is no difference between saying this property and my property?
Challenge.
Question mark. V'hatnan. But aren't we taught elsewhere in the Mishnah? Ha'omer lechavero. One who says to his neighbor, Konam letoch beitecha she'ani nichnas. I make a vow, okay, regarding your household, okay, that it is prohibited for me to enter. Sadcha she'ani lokeach. Or I make a vow that prohibits for me from buying your property. Okay, mate, okay, if the individual, the owner of the house or the property dies, o shemachro, or he sold it, okay, la'acher mutar, okay, to the other, it is now
Once it's owned by someone else. it's
now
okay.
permitted, okay, because the ownership has changed. L'bayet zeh she'ani nichnas. If he says to this house that I might enter, sadeh zo she'ani lokeach. This piece of land, property that I may buy, mate o shemachro la'acher. If the owner then of the house or that property then dies or sells it to another, remember here the vow was made regarding the house or the property, not the person, and therefore asur. It continues to be forbidden. Okay,
Let me ask, if he inherits the property,
who?
the person that were it's assured to him.
How would he
His
inherit?
father, his father leaves it. He has his father's possession, doesn't?
It
Don't they all
doesn't
go to
say
the
it
son?
was his father,
But it
so
doesn't.
has to be
Number
a-
one,
it says chaveru.
if you're assuming that if you're basing it on what the earlier Gemara said. The earlier Gemara said, what if the father said, you're not to have any benefit from me, right?
Yes.
So the Gemara has already told us that the question is, what happens when the father dies? Does he inherit it or not? That doesn't apply in this case. Okay,
The difference is what-
all right? So what happens?
The guy who wants to buy, who wants the property, can't get it. The initial guy can't get it, right?
If I made a vow, Tzvi cannot buy this property. Okay? What is the vow on? It's on you. If I make a vow, this property cannot ever be bought by Tzvi Karpel. That's different because then the vow is regarding that property. Okay, so
Doesn't
there's,
matter who owns it. you
so
can't
that's different because once I say that, it means you're never able to buy that property.
buy. Except that your case is slightly off. If Tzvi says, I will never buy Kenny's property, and
Right.
Kenny sells it to me, then you could buy it.
You could
from
buy
me.
it from him.
But if you said, I will never buy 1010 Yarmouth A, then whoever owns 1010 Yarmouth A, it's irrelevant.
then
You may
Never
buy
buy
it.
it. That's,
You know,
right, let's-
he-
all right, let's
I
go.
sold it to someone else.
So what? You made the vow on the
Right,
property.
On the
not
property
on
as
the
opposed to
owner.
the person.
So it'd be all right then. to use-
No.
No. If
Depending
not, if it's
the
on the
wording. If
property.
you said, I won't buy property from
him.
Schwartz. So if Schwartz doesn't own it, then you could buy it.
Right,
But if you say, I will not buy
that particular
such
property,
and such a piece of property.
you can
It's
never buy it.
irrelevant who owns
It
it.
doesn't
you can
matter who
never
owns it.
buy that
Right.
piece of property.
Right? Okay.
Right, but
Ella,
who died?
the person who
The owner
owned
of
it, the owner,
Original guy?
original owner, right? Ella ki amre Rabbi Yochanan v'Reish Lakish. But when Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish say the following, b'nechasai, when they say in regarding the individual making the vow, it says my property. So what is the Gemara trying to come to an answer? It answers it this way. Okay, if you say whether or not the prohibition continues, okay, beyond the ownership, okay, that's when it's according to Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, that applies when the person says my property. V'Rav Shmuel b'nechasim elu, okay, and Rav and Shmuel are talking about a situation where the person says this property, v'lo pligi, and therefore we don't have an argument between Rav and Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Okay. Next part of our Mishnah. Ubashvi'it ein yorei l'toch sadehu v'chuli. Okay. So the Gemara now says the following. Ma'ishna de'ochel min hanotot. What is so unique or different about eating from this hanging fruit over the boundary line or the fence? The piri, the hefkera inun. Aren't these during the Shvi'it year? Isn't this fruit considered to be hefker? And then that should be eligible for anyone to come and get it. Aranami hefkara. But isn't the land also going to be considered hefker during the Shvi'it year? Okay. So in theoretically, you could raise the question, it shouldn't be necessary then even to enter to pick that fruit. Is it still forbidden? Okay. Amar Ula, says Ula. Ba'omdim ilanot al hagvul. Ula is explaining it. What we might be talking about is that the trees are right on the border of the boundary and the hanging fruit hangs over. And therefore, maybe it's not necessary to enter to pick it. And therefore, the question is it still going to be forbidden or not? Okay. If it's hefker, why shouldn't he be able to pick it? And not only that, but if it's hefker, why shouldn't he be able to enter it even with the vow and still pick it there? Okay. Rabbi Shimon ben Eliakim Amar, he says, Gezerah Shema Yisher Ba'amida. Okay, maybe the rabbis made this as a gezerah, lest the person come in and hang around there too long. Okay, stay there too long when he comes in to try to get the fruit. Okay, okay, we'll do just the Mishnah and then we'll stop. New Mishnah. Hamudar Hana'am Chavero. Again, as we said before, we're talking about a situation where one is subject to a vow. Lo yashilena, he may not lend him anything. V'lo yish'al mimenu, and he cannot borrow something from him. Lo yilonu, he cannot lend him money. V'lo yilaveh mimenu, nor can he borrow money from him. V'lo yimkor lo, he cannot sell him anything. V'lo yikach mimenu, nor can he buy anything from him. And tomorrow we'll pick up on Mem Gimel, okay, with the clarification of what it means when we're saying that there's no interaction between them. Okay?
I'm getting myself together.
All right. Okay.
Rabbi Green, what I wanted